My name is Emily Prifogle. I'm an assistant professor of law here at Michigan. I have a courtesy appointment in the history department, and I teach property law and rural law. So first of all, everybody should take property, even though property law is not a required class here at Michigan. I think it's really important because property law is the law of how the world around us is shaped, the physical world, how it gets manifested. Property law determines that, but it also determines how people get power and maintain power as they navigate that physical world. So I think property law is really important to take. A really wonderful thing about property here at Michigan is that you don't have to take it your 1L year, and you can choose what professor you want to take it with. And so we all of us who teach property law, bring different expertise, different pedagogical decisions, different interests to the classroom. And so if you take property law with me, you get a very interdisciplinary approach to property law. And I am particularly interested in history and the historical origins of property law, but also the social context of property law as well. So in my property law class, you get all of the kind of typical things that you would learn in a 1L class, things like zoning, the rule against perpetuities, mortgages, covenants, like just the basic package of doctrinal law that you would learn in a 1L property law course, but you learn all of it in historical and social context. So I teach a seminar on rural law, and it's partly derives out of my own research interests, and I came to rural law because I'm from a rural community, and I was studying the legal history of the 20th century in the US, and I didn't see where I grew up reflected in those kind of legal histories, and so I wanted to correct that. So part of what my class is just kind of the same version, is me kind of telling my students about how rural communities fit into the rest of the legal curriculum that they're learning. But I think rural law and my rural law seminar is of interest to students who aren't from rural places, right? There's lots of students who aren't from the UP, even though I get lots of those students too. There's always some New Yorkers or some folks from LA who come as well. And what I think they are getting out of this class are maybe there's three things. So one is like 20%, like the most conservative count I think is somewhere around 20% of Americans live in a rural place. It's a lot of Americans, and we should know how law affects those rural communities. The second is that rural communities experience law in distinct ways. So, we have federal education law, but rural folks experience those in distinct ways because there's rural geographies that shape their communities and social forms and political forms. And so the experience of rural law is different, and we should kind of know how place matters for the law and policy that we interact with as lawyers. And so rural is one way of thinking about that, and you can transfer those skills even if you work in a city because you're thinking about place. And then the third thing, I think, is that rural communities today are facing a lot of challenges. There's a shortage of lawyers, there's a shortage of teachers, there's a shortage of doctors. All of their economies are either lagging or in transition, and they're facing a lot of challenges. And so I think of rural law, and rural law is just like all law happens in rural places, we're just looking in a rural place, as public interest law. So if you are interested in public interest law, if you want to be a nonprofit lawyer, if you want to do that kind of service work, rural communities need you, and you should learn about how rural communities face those challenges, those legal aid challenges in different ways than urban communities do. So my mini seminar is just a mini version of my big rural law seminar. And the mini seminar is an opportunity, for me and 10 students to get together over dinner at my house to talk about legal issues that are of interest. The fun thing about the mini seminar is that it's totally driven by student interest. So we have 6 sessions, and our first session is just kind of figuring out what rural is. Then our 4 middle sessions are on whatever topics the students are interested in. So this past year, we talked about rural voting rights, rural healthcare, rural environmental law, and rural economies. So that's 5 sessions. And then our 5th session, all of the students presented on a topic of their own choice. So that ranged from things like rural maternal health, how to dissolve a rural local government, what rural parks look like, food deserts in native communities. It's just a wide gamut where students got to choose and pursue their own interest. And that's actually one of my favorite parts about the mini seminar, is that they're all over for dinner. And so we get to have that chit chat beforehand, and I get to know students more outside the classroom, individually. I get to know what they were, the interesting things that they did around the law school that week were, but also kind of substantively as well. And then the other fun thing about a mini seminar is that they're not graded. And I don't like to grade. No teacher likes to grade. No student likes to be graded. But what not being graded frees up is that we are all genuinely curious in this topic, and we can just learn because it's really fun. And so we spend 12 hours together over the course of a semester exploring the topics in rural law that students are interested in, that I'm interested in. So I get to learn a lot because it's more kind of free-ranging in our conversations. And I think students have fun because it's more about curiosity than about some kind of instrumental tool, like I need this grade to get this clerkship, or I need to learn, this topic because it's what I'm going to practice later on. We're all just being nerds together. So the law origin story is actually really straightforward. In undergrad, I was doing a lot of community engagement work. I wanted to be a public interest lawyer, so I went to Berkeley for law school. That origin story is pretty straightforward, short. Turns out as soon as I got to law school, I was like, oh, maybe I don't want to be a public interest lawyer. Maybe I don't want to be a lawyer at all. And so it took some time, actually. The origin story is not the story so much as how I found my way back into being a law professor. And it turns out that while I was in law school, the courses I liked the most were courses where I got to do research and writing, mostly around topics of legal history, and I studied the way that, I was really interested in the way that people created social change. Okay. And then, so if that's the courses I liked, the experience I liked were whenever I got to be a teaching assistant, or when I was, getting my master's or getting my PhD, when I got to teach. I love teaching. I like to do the institution building work at universities too. So it turns out that those two things are actually my job description now, right? I have my dream job, and those things were in law school, but when I was a law student, I couldn't quite see my way into being a lawyer in the same way that most of my peers were. So there's this longer story of coming back to being a law professor, but now, here I am in a law school teaching property law. My 1L self would not recognize me, and I love it. And I think it's because lots of the things that I learned in law school, both kind of mechanically about how the law works, but also about myself and the things that I'm actually really interested in. And it took me a while to figure out how I fit back in, but now I'm here and I've got my dream job. It's great. So I really love talking about the program in race, law, and history. I am a co-director along with professors Novak and Ehrman. And the program brings together faculty, law students, and PhD students and faculty from elsewhere on campus, all together around the intersection of race, law, and history. So the faculty that are affiliated with it and the co-directors, all of our research in some way or another is about race, law, and history. Some folks focus on, some subset of those two, but we all are kind of legal historians of race in some way or another. But the real kind of center stone of the program is the fellowship. And every year we try to have about 5 fellows and create a cohort. And the students are mostly 3Ls and also PhD students, mostly from history, but also kind of everywhere on campus. And for a year, those fellows are supported financially, and then, with all the other kinds of supports that we can give them as faculty members. So they form a cohort, and they go to the legal history conference, wherever that is in the country, together. They learn what it means to conduct legal history research, how to do archival research if they're a law student. If they're in the history department, they learn what it means to think like a lawyer. And they work all semester on a project of their own choosing. They go off to do archival research, they come back, and the paper that they write, the article that they write, the dissertation chapter that they write, they present at a seminar at the end of the year. The seminar is this really kind of lovely space. It's really intimate, where we all kind of share the research that we've been working on that year. For the students, every year we find some new prestigious legal historian to come in, read their work, and comment on their work at the seminar. And so it's a really great opportunity for students who are really serious about doing research and who are interested in, like if you're a law student, probably race in the law and don't know much about history and want to do kind of more history work, to have this opportunity to kind of do this research in a very focused way over the across 1 year. So that's a very focused space, mostly for 3Ls. Then the kind of last most exciting part about the Race Law and History program is that we have just added a course that is associated with it. And so the Race Law and History course is a 4-credit course where students read a bunch of legal history. They also get treated, in my opinion, to, I don't know, half a dozen outside legal history speakers, a lot of folks who are at the cutting edge of race law and history scholarship, whether they are established legal historians or emerging scholars, but they get to hear a diverse range of outside speakers. And so that course is really kind of both a gateway into the fellowship program for 1Ls and 2Ls, and it's also open to 3Ls, just kind of anybody who's interested in learning more about how race law and history can be understood as, a body of scholarship and not just something on the fringes. So I'm working on a legal history of the rural Midwest in the 20th century. And what I'm really interested in is the way in which whatever we call the rural manifests through legal contests and debates over policy. And I do that through looking at several fields of law over the course of the 20th century. So I look at things like labor law, education, healthcare, legal practice, federal Indian policy, rural economies, and I think about the ways in which those communities, those rural communities, confront challenges, and they use legal tools to manifest themselves as rural communities. What I'm particularly interested in are ways in which race and gender shape that process of legal debate over whatever we call rural and whatever the boundaries of the rural are, and especially the ways in which Americans, whether they're rural or not, think about what the rural is and how that gets manifested through the law. Women Also Know Law is attempting to change the look and sound of legal expertise. Professor Leah Littman and I were inspired by other Women Also Know projects. So there's a bunch of political scientists got together and formed Women Also Know Stuff, and we were inspired, as were about a dozen other fields in academia, to change the way that legal academia is represented and the way in which women and non-binary scholars are represented in legal academia. Women and non-binary scholars are severely underrepresented, both on law faculty, but also in citation counts and in the media when a journalist looks for an expert. So we have tried through 2 ways to do this work of changing the look and sound of legal expertise. One is through a searchable database. So you can go to the Women Also Know Law database and search for a woman or non-binary legal expert on any topic you need. So if you're a journalist, or if you're working on research, or you're creating a syllabus, you can go and find the legal expertise that you need. And so what this does is it takes away the excuse that the conference organizer or the journalist didn't know an expert who was a woman or non-binary scholar. We've done all of the hard work for them. They just go to this database. So that's one component of it, and it's a big component of it. But the other component that I think is, the most fun is the Twitter feed. And I say that because we formed Women Also Know Law here at Michigan with the support of a lot of other faculty who make up our advisory board and the law school itself. And so our Twitter feed celebrates and amplifies the work of women in the law. Their accomplishments, their recent publications, all of those things get kind of promoted on our Twitter feed. But here, the behind the scenes work of it at Michigan is that all of the faculty on our advisory board are paired with students here at the law school who help curate our feed. And so it's really fun to get to work with your team of students all year long. You get to know the students outside the classroom. And then the students are constantly thinking of new creative ways to promote women in the law. And so it's a great experience for me as a faculty member. I get to work with Leah Littman as a co-creator of the project, but also I get to hang out with the students in a way that I don't often get to do when I'm in the classroom. So I think I have two pieces of advice. One is if the student has committed to law school, they're watching this over the summer, stop. Don't do anything else, and you're done for the summer. But the piece of advice that I most like to give students, whether they're an incoming law student or they're one of my 3Ls, is that you should take classes that interest you. Almost certainly, this is true for most students in law school, it will be your last chance to take university classes, right? It's the last time you're going to be in school. It's not the last time to learn something, but it's the last time to be in school. And so you should trust that 3 years of law school is going to teach you to teach or to think like a lawyer, right? We're going to teach you the doctrine that you need to know. You're going to get a lot of it by osmosis, just being in classes. And so you shouldn't worry too much about taking classes because you think you're going to need that class to pass the bar or to do whatever you're going to do in your career. You should take classes that you're interested in. You should take classes with professors that seem interesting. And I think that curiosity should guide you through law school instead of kind of any instrumental or strategic kind of way to pass through law school. So I think the two most striking things to me about Michigan law is one is how interdisciplinary they let me be in my research and my teaching and how receptive the students are to it. I have a PhD in history, I have my law degree. Both of those things are really important to who I am as an academic and teacher, and it's lovely to be at a place where that is supported and appreciated, and I can have all kinds of conversations with both students and faculty about legal history, but also kind of, law and anything, psychology, philosophy. I just think that makes it a really fun place to be. The other thing, which is not part of my intellectual life necessarily, is that it was really important to me and is really important to me that I teach at a public university. And so one of my favorite things about Michigan law is that it is an amazing law school, right? It is this, it competes with all of these private universities, but we are a public law school with all of these outreach clinics that are working in Detroit and in our communities, but also all of these professors who are doing all kinds of public-facing work. And it's a public institution where, you go anywhere in the world and everybody says, go blue, right? Everybody knows Michigan, the state of Michigan, is cheering us on, whether it's in football or a win for the law school. And I think it's really great to work at a public university.